Welcome to this continuing series on the Septuagint. Before going through the New Testament and comparing the Old Testament quotations to the Hebrew Masoretic and the Greek Septuagint, there is one important thing to address. In the third video about the notable differences between the Masoretic and the Septuagint, we looked at the only known problem with the Septuagint, that the genealogy of Genesis 5 places Methuselah's death 14 years after the flood. After sharing that video, I had two viewers point out something important of which I was unaware. In the first video, we talked about the three families of manuscripts, the Masoretic, the Septuagint, and the Samaritan. Remember that within each family, there are manuscripts that are different. It turns out that one of the differences in the Septuagint family of manuscripts is found in Genesis 5:25. The Septuagint found at the Vatican says that Methuselah was 167 years old when he fathered Lamech, the father of Noah. This places the flood 2,242 years after Adam. The Septuagint from the Vatican is used in most translations of the Septuagint, and this is how it was explained in that video. However, the Septuagint found at Alexandria says that Methuselah was 187 when he fathered Lamech. This pushes Lamech's birth, Noah's birth, and the year of the flood back 20 years, and so it places the flood at 2,262 years after Adam. So according to the Alexandrian Septuagint, Methuselah died 6 years before the flood, and not 14 years after the flood, as the Vatican Septuagint states. And so, the only problem with the Septuagint is not even a problem at all for the Alexandrian Septuagint. In the end, there are no known problems with the Greek Septuagint, while the known problems with the Masoretic Old Testament still remain. To review what those are, feel free to watch that portion of the third video in this series. Now that we have cleared up this important aspect of the Septuagint, let's continue comparing the Hebrew Masoretic with the Greek Septuagint by going through the New Testament and seeing which manuscript family the writers used when quoting from the Old Testament. For the New Testament readings and the Hebrew Masoretic readings, I will use the American Standard Version, which is a very accurate translation of both. For the Greek Septuagint readings, I will use Brenton's translation, which is a very accurate translation of the Septuagint. And since these translations were published less than 60 years apart, their readings should be similar. As we go through each passage, we will keep a running count of the family of manuscripts and the number of verses which the New Testament writers followed. Matthew 1:23 is about the prophecy that predicts Christ's birth. It reads, "Behold, the virgin shall be with child, and shall bring forth a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel." This verse was already discussed in the previous video. Click here for more information about it. As we saw, Matthew is following the Septuagint's reading of Isaiah 7:14. Matthew 2:6 is about what the chief priests and the scribes told Herod when he asked them where the Christ would be born. It reads, "And you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are in no way least among the princes of Judah, for out of you shall come forth a governor, who shall be shepherd of my people Israel." This is a quotation from Micah 5:2. The Masoretic reads, "But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, which is little to be among the thousands of Judah, out of you shall one come unto me that is to be ruler in Israel." The Masoretic reads Ephrathah instead of the land of Judah. It is not exactly known what Ephrathah is, but while Bethlehem is the geographical name, Ephrathah is probably the ethnic name for the people of the Bethlehem region. And the last half of the verse is very different. Matthew does not follow the Masoretic. The Septuagint reads, "And you, Bethlehem, house of Ephrathah, are few in number to be reckoned among the thousands of Judah. Yet out of you shall one come forth to me, to be a ruler of Israel." Amazingly, the Septuagint's reading is just like the Masoretic's reading, except it says few in number, when the Masoretic says little. Matthew is indeed using Micah 5:2, but his reading is not really following the Masoretic or the Septuagint. Just as there are differences between English translations today, there were differences between manuscripts back then. It is possible that Matthew is using a manuscript with the genuine reading, but which has since been lost. Neither the Septuagint nor the Masoretic will be counted on this verse. Matthew 2:15 is about when Joseph and Mary fled to Egypt with Jesus to escape Herod. It reads, "Out of Egypt did I call my son." This is a quotation from Hosea 11:1. The Masoretic reads, "I called my son out of Egypt." The Masoretic reads the same, though the order is different. The Septuagint reads, "Out of Egypt have I called his children." The Septuagint says his instead of my, and children instead of son. So while Matthew follows the Septuagint's order, he follows the Masoretic's words. Of the manuscript families we have today, it is too hard to tell which one Matthew is following. Like in the previous quotation, Matthew might be using an ancient manuscript that has since been lost, but more likely, he is simply and purposefully switching the Masoretic's order of Hosea 11:1. Let's say that Matthew is using the Masoretic. Matthew 2:18 is about the mothers whose children were killed by Herod. It reads, "A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and she would not be comforted, because they are not." This brings up another difference in New Testament manuscripts. The Alexandrian family of manuscripts, which the American Standard Version and most modern translations use, lists two kinds of sadness. The Byzantine family, which include translations such as the New King James, include a third word here, lamentation. This difference in New Testament manuscripts probably exists because of the difference in Old Testament manuscripts, which we are about to see. This quotation is from Jeremiah 31:15. The Masoretic reads, "A voice is heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping. Rachel is weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for them, because they are no more." The Masoretic lists two kinds of sadness, which agrees with the Alexandrian family of New Testament manuscripts, but disagrees with the Byzantine family of manuscripts. Because the Septuagint has a different order of the chapters in Jeremiah, this quotation is from chapter 38, verse 15. It reads, "A voice was heard in Ramah, of lamentation and of weeping and wailing. Rachel would not cease weeping for her children, because they are not." The Septuagint's three kinds of sadness are a bit different. It agrees with the Byzantine family of New Testament manuscripts, but disagrees with the Alexandrian family of manuscripts. Also, it does not speak about refusing comfort, but instead that Rachel just won't stop weeping. Matthew's quotation is mostly identical to the Septuagint. Though Matthew does not quote either precisely, it seems that he is more closely following the Masoretic. Matthew 2:23 is about how Joseph settled in Nazareth, which became Jesus' hometown. It reads, "He should be called a Nazarene." Incredibly, the Old Testament passage that Matthew is quoting is completely unknown. Jerome wrote that he believed Matthew was using Isaiah 11:1. There, the Hebrew word is netzer, which is translated branch or shoot, as in, "A shoot out of the stalk of Jesse, and a branch out of his roots shall bear fruit." Jerome was confident that this word should be rendered Nazarene. Sadly, since Matthew's quotation cannot be found in today's Masoretic or in today's Septuagint, I will say he follows neither. Maybe Matthew was using Isaiah 11:1. Maybe he used some other Old Testament passage that has since been lost. Or maybe Matthew is not trying to quote the Old Testament, but is showing the truth about Jesus' hometown while poking fun at his contemporary so-called prophets who were giving Nazareth a bad reputation in that day. See John 1:45 and 46. Thus far, we have looked at the first two chapters of Matthew. Matthew 2:6 didn't follow either manuscript family, and Matthew 2:23 isn't found in any Old Testament. Right now, we have one verse that follows the Septuagint, two verses that follow the Masoretic, and two verses that didn't follow either. Things aren't looking so well. But from here on, we will start to see a general pattern in how the New Testament writers will favor the Septuagint over the Masoretic. Matthew 3:3 is about John the Baptist. It reads, "The voice of one crying in the wilderness, make you ready the way of the Lord, make his paths straight." This is a quotation from Isaiah 40:3. The Masoretic reads, "The voice of one that cries, prepare you in the wilderness the way of Jehovah, make level in the desert a highway for our God." The Masoretic says that the wilderness is where the way needs to be prepared, while Matthew says that the wilderness is where the person will be crying out. The Masoretic speaks about building a highway in the desert, while Matthew says people need to make straight ways for God's paths. The Septuagint reads, "The voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare you the way of the Lord, make straight the paths of our God." The only difference here is that the Septuagint says, "of our God," while Matthew says, "him." Matthew more closely follows the Septuagint's reading. That is enough for now. We will continue looking at New Testament quotations from the Old Testament next year. Blessings and so forth.